Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett. Today we're going to make two jigs for the circular saw. We're going to make a crosscut jig and a ripping jig. And I just want to give you a quick reminder, if you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to do that. Click the little notification bell and let's get started with these two jigs. I currently have the two jigs that we're going to be making today, and I thought I had a video on it, but I don't, so that's where this one's coming from. What I want you to do, because I'm in limited space here, and it's hard to videotape this using a full 8-sheet long piece of plywood, but for your first jig, a ripping jig, to use the circular saw, what you'll need to do is go to the hardware store and purchase either a full sheet of plywood or you can get a half sheet, 2 feet wide by 8 feet long. So I want you to imagine that this sheet of plywood is 8 feet long. You can use 1/4 of an inch thickness. I like to go just a little bit more. I think this one is 5/16, so it's just a little bit more than the 1/4. And that gives me just a little bit more. It's a little heavier, but it's a little bit better for the edge of the saw to ride on. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to rip a piece of wood here. But before we get started, I want to tell you that the plywood that you hand pick, I want you to make sure that the factory edge on it, not the one that they cut, the factory edge is pristine all the way along, because that's going to be your new fence. So you don't want it jagged or broken or cracked. You want the best edge that you can get. So hand pick your plywood, and let me show you what the next thing we're going to do with it. The first thing we're going to do is with our sheet of plywood, now here's the factory edge, we're going to cut off a 3-inch strip. And I don't know if you can see that line on there, but I've drawn a line on there, and I'm just going to use my circular saw and do a hand cut of that. Now I've already inserted my blade, but I want to tell you that I've taken the 24-tooth blade out of my circular saw and I've put in a plywood blade that's 40-tooth. And the reason I've done that, I want to make the very best cuts that I can. And this is actually a plywood blade. They sell this as a plywood blade. It costs a little bit more, but you get much better results from it. Before I get started, I want to remind you that even with a circular saw, we reset the height of the blade so that it's just barely below the depth of the material that we're cutting. We do that because we get a better cut and we also get a safer cut. So I'm just going to set that. So here's the piece I cut off, and we just freehanded that, and if I look down it, I can see it's not a perfect cut, and it doesn't matter, because now here's why this factory edge is so important. We're going to take the piece we cut off and we're going to move it. You need to make sure, you may want to mark it too so that you don't get it flipped around. This factory edge now is going to be our new the new guide for the saw. So what I need to do, I've just taken the battery out so that I can measure this safely, and on my saw that blade is 5 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to do, it's actually a little bit less than that, but I want to go a little bit further. So I'm going to mark this at 5 1/4 on each side. Now what I want to do, remember this is the factory edge and we're working with an 8-inch or an 8-foot long piece of wood. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clamp it end to end, and I'm going to drive some screws from underneath all the way along and fasten this on. Okay, here's the new fence that we've put on, and there's the factory edge, and our saw is going to sit like this. And if you look carefully here, you'll see that this blade is actually going to cut into this plywood by just about 1/4 of an inch, and that's perfect, because what we want to do now, and we want to make sure that we do a good job of this, we're going to ride all the way along here, and this is going to be our new factory edge. And there's our jig, and now this part here is identical to this one here. So what we can do now is we can use this one to line up, and I've moved this around so that we can make a cut here, and it's a little bit easier so that you can see it, and it's better for me to clamp it on this side. So let's just do a quick test of this, and we'll cut, we'll just take 3 inches just for fun, and we'll mark that. And there. And now all we need to do is line up our jig right there and right there, right along the face of this. And for this, I'm going to clamp it down. Okay, I've clamped it down. I can see my mark there and my mark there, right along the face edge. And I'm going to cut this off. Now, if this part was the part that you wanted to keep, you'd have to compensate for the thickness of the blade. We're not worrying about that today. We're just testing this jig. Well, and there's the piece that we cut off. Nothing special, but that just shows you how it works. And that's how easy it is to make that jig and how effective it is. It does just a super job. It's quick and easy and accurate. Let's make a crosscut version to go with it now. Crosscutting with the circular saw is something I still do quite frequently, especially if I've got long boards that are hard to manage and I can cut off smaller pieces. And a lot of carpenters that are used to using these tools, sometimes they'll just use a square, and they can put the square on wherever they want to. They'll draw a line and put the saw to the line, and then they'll follow along the square. More recently, with these triangles that are a little bit thicker, that's been a very popular thing because it's easier to hang on the end of the board. You can go this way, and you can go this way, and either way, they both do an adequate job. Today, we're going to make a jig that's a little bit easier and a little bit safer than something like this, especially for somebody who's new to using a circular saw. So to make this jig, all I've done is taken a smaller version, a shorter version. In fact, I cut it off, obviously, but a shorter version of the ripping jig that we made, because now, instead of ripping, we're cross-cutting. So what we want to do is attach this piece of wood to the end of it, and we want it to be at an exact perfect right angle. So what I'm going to be doing is taking my square, and I'm going to leave this a little bit proud of my base here so that I can get my square on there. And what I'll be doing is setting that up and aligning that, and I'll drive some screws in there, and then we'll do a cut. So to use this jig, all we do now is measure down wherever we want to make our line, and I'm just going to make that right there. And now all we need to do is line out. Remember, this is the outside, and that's where we're going to cut the line. Now I could do a couple of things. If I want, I can hold it. I could hold it here, and because we've got an area up here, I could actually hold it up there as well. But the other thing that I can do with this, especially if I'm new to woodworking or I'm not comfortable using a circular saw, you can take that, line that up there, and now you can actually clamp this and still make that cut and make an excellent, perfect cut. Well, that concludes my video for today. 2 different jigs, 2 ways of cutting using a circular saw and getting some really good cuts each time. And of course, the details of that will be on Woodwork Web, and the link is in the description box underneath. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.